They took the morphine schedule. They turned it into a shift plan. They took the notebook I kept by her bed. They called it obsessive. They took $240,000 out of a dying woman's accounts. 19 days. That's all it took. My sister smiled while she did it. My mother squeezed my hand and told me to let her. I said nothing. I wrote the time down instead. And when the banker finally shut his office door and asked to see me alone, he didn't ask about the funeral. He asked if I still had the envelope. Here's what none of us knew going in. The woman who was dying had already won. But before the envelope, there was the hospice room. Let me take you back 3 weeks. My name is Dana Marie Boyd. I was 32 years old the winter my mother died. It happened in a hospice on the edge of Daleford, Ohio. I did not cry much in that room. Not because I was strong, because I was busy. I kept a notebook, spiral bound, 79 cents at the drugstore on Route 9. Every dose written down, every visitor, every hour. I'd started it the second week. A night nurse asked me when Mom's last pain medication was. I realized nobody else in that family could answer. Not my sister, not my aunts, just me. Mom's hospice bed sat by a window. It looked out on a parking lot and a maple tree. The tree was losing its leaves one at a time like it had all the patience in the world. We didn't. Birch Lane Hospice, they called it. It smelled like lemon cleaner. Underneath that, something the lemon cleaner could never quite cover. My sister Brooke came on a Tuesday. Leather folder, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She sat on the edge of Mom's bed like it was a chair at a nail salon. She pulled out a stack of withdrawal slips. She fanned them across the blanket, right over Mom's knees. She said it plain, like she was reading a grocery list. She won't need it where she's going. I didn't say anything. I looked at Mom's hand in mine, thin now, the skin loose over the bones. I kept holding it. I wrote the time in my notebook. 2:14 p.m. Brooke, withdrawal slips, blanket. That's the kind of sister Brooke was. 35 years old. Older than me by 3 years. Older than me in every way that mattered to our mother. Homecoming queen. Valedictorian technically, though she'd cheated off a boy named Grant Pelly in AP chemistry. Nobody ever proved it. She owned a medical spa in Columbus, an hour north. Her name on the sign in gold cursive. Tanner Aesthetics. She married a man named Kurt Tanner. He sold boats. He believed every word Brooke told him. Growing up, I was the other one, the steady one. The one who did the dishes without being asked. I got a good job, Dana that always sounded like a consolation prize. Brooke got the trip to Europe for graduation. I got a second-hand car with a check engine light that never went off. I'm not telling you this to complain. I'm telling you because it matters for what comes later. A banker slides a piece of paper across a desk. Everyone in the room finds out exactly what our mother thought of both of us. Our mother's name was Marlene Boyd. She'd worked 31 years at the county clerk's office, filing deeds, marriage licenses, probate records for people who never said thank you. She used to tell me that paperwork was just love that hadn't been read yet. I didn't understand that sentence until much later. Hold on to it. It matters. Marlene had raised us alone, a clapboard house on Ridenour Street. Everyone still called that part of Daleford the Old Quarry, even though the quarry itself had closed before I was born. She kept that house clean enough to eat off the floor, cold enough in winter that we wore coats inside. The furnace was old. She never wanted to spend the money to replace it. She had $11,000 in savings for most of my childhood. I know the number because she told me once, flat, like a fact about the weather. $11,040. She'd counted it 100 times. By the time she got sick, that 11,000 had grown. Slow and careful, the way things grow when somebody refuses to touch them. $240,000. spread across 3 accounts at Lakemore Savings and Trust on Sentinel Street, the same bank she'd used since 1987. I found out about the diagnosis on a Thursday in September. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, the doctor said. Flat, clinical voice, the kind they use so the words don't fall on you like a roof. 6 months? Maybe less. Brooke cried at the appointment. Real tears, I think. I've never doubted that Brooke loved our mother in her own crooked way. I just learned, over those 3 weeks, that Brooke loved money more. When the two collided, money won every time. I moved into the hospice room the day Mom was admitted. I took a leave from my job at the elementary school, 3rd grade, $41,000 a year. I brought a folding cot. I set it against the wall under the window, and I stayed. Brooke visited when it suited her. Twice a week, sometimes 3, always with the leather folder, always leaving early. I have clients, she'd say. Somebody has to keep the business running. Nobody in the family ever asked why the business needed her more than our dying mother did. Nobody in the family asked much of anything about Brooke. That was the arrangement. It had always been the arrangement. I watched Mom's hands the whole 3 weeks. She was lucid more than the doctors expected. In and out, the way people are near the end, present enough to squeeze my fingers, present enough to mumble half a sentence, then drift somewhere I couldn't follow. One of those lucid windows came on a Sunday morning. The light was flat and gray. She pulled my hand close to her mouth. Let her take it, Dana. Let her. I thought it was the morphine talking. I wrote it down anyway. 9:40 a.m., Sunday. Let her take it. Let her. I underlined it twice. Even confused, my mother had never once told me to let Brooke take anything. Not the good bike, not the last seat in the car, not the last say in an argument. That sentence sat wrong in my chest. Small, impossible to ignore. Like a splinter under a fingernail. 3 days later, Mom pressed something else into my hand. A sealed envelope, cream-colored, the kind you buy in a box of 20 at the drugstore. My name written on the front in her careful county clerk handwriting. Dana, don't open it, she said. Her voice was down to almost nothing. Take it to Walter. The day after you bury me, not before. Walter Keene had been the branch manager at Lakemore Savings and Trust for as long as I could remember. He used to give Brooke and me lollipops from a jar on his desk. That was when Mom brought us in to make deposits. He was in his 60s now, silver-haired, precise. The kind of man who still wore a tie to a small-town bank because he believed the job deserved it. I put the envelope in my coat pocket. I did not open it. It was hard. Some version of me wanted to tear it open right there in the hospice chair. Read whatever truth my mother was too tired to say out loud. I didn't. I'd spent my whole life being the daughter who did what she was told. That habit was about to matter more than anything I'd ever done. I told you I write everything down. Picture the notebook now because it becomes important. Spiral bound. Blue cover. A coffee ring on the front from the hospice cafeteria. Inside, in my handwriting, 3 weeks of doses and times and visitors, kept the way I'd been taught to keep a classroom attendance sheet. It was the only kind of record keeping I actually knew how to do. I never once thought of it as evidence. I thought of it as love, the only kind I had time to give. Brooke's visits started lining up with something. I didn't clock it at first. She'd come in around 2 in the afternoon, sit with Mom for 20 minutes, ask me to step out and get coffee or check on the paperwork at the nurse's station. By the time I came back, she'd be gone again, folder and all, saying she had a client at 3. I stepped out 4 separate times that second week. I wrote each one down. Time out, time back, what Brooke said before I left the room. I didn't think about bank statements. I thought about coffee going cold in a paper cup, about my mother's breathing, about whether the maple tree outside had any leaves left. I was 32 years old. My whole world had narrowed down to one hospital bed and a spiral notebook. I did not have room in my head yet for what my sister was actually doing while I was gone. That's the shape of the first week and a half. I want to slow down here. Everything that happens after this only makes sense if you understand exactly how ordinary those days felt while they were happening. Nothing about a woman dying quietly in a hospice bed looks like the beginning of anything. It looks like an ending. That's what we all thought it was. We were wrong. My mother, it turned out, had been finishing something. The rest of us hadn't even noticed she'd started it. The second week, a woman named Carol Ann Ives started showing up in the mornings. She was Mom's oldest friend. The two of them went back to a bowling league in 1988. She came every day at 7 with a thermos of coffee and a crossword she never actually finished. Carol Ann didn't ask questions. She didn't perform grief the way some visitors did, dabbing their eyes for an audience. She just sat. She helped me change the water in the flowers. Once, quietly, she refilled my own coffee without me asking. "You're doing the hard part," Carol Ann told me one morning, not looking up from her crossword. "Everybody sees the funeral. Nobody sees this." I didn't know what to say to that, so I wrote the time in my notebook instead. 7:06 a.m. Carol Ann, coffee, said the hard part. It was Carol Ann who mentioned almost offhand that she'd seen Brooke's silver SUV parked outside Lakemore Savings and Trust twice that week, days she wasn't scheduled to visit the hospice at all. I didn't think much of it in the moment. Brooke banked there too, same as the rest of us grew up doing. It was the only real bank in Daleford that wasn't a drive-through kiosk at the grocery store. I wrote it down anyway. Tuesday, Brooke's car at Lakemore, no hospice visit that day. I was starting to write down anything that didn't quite fit, the way you'd note a crack in a foundation before you understood what it meant for the whole house. On the 12th day, Mom had a good afternoon. Sharp, present, more herself than she'd been in a week. She asked for water. She asked about my classroom, whether little Tyler Pruitt in my third-grade class was still struggling with his multiplication tables. She asked, out of nowhere, whether I still had my grandmother's wedding ring, the one Mom had given me for my 25th birthday. I told her yes. It was in my jewelry box at home, wrapped in a handkerchief. "Good," she said. "Keep it close, Dana. Some things you don't hand over just because somebody asks nicely." I thought she meant the ring. I wrote the sentence down anyway, word for word. By then, I'd learned my mother rarely said anything without meaning at least two things at once. That night, after Brooke had come and gone with her folder, a nurse named Priya mentioned something. Kindly, professionally. A bank representative had called the front desk twice that week, asking to verify Marlene Boyd's continued residency and medical status. "Standard procedure," Priya said, "for large account activity." I asked which bank. Priya checked her clipboard. "Lakemore Savings and Trust." I wrote it down. Twice this week. Verifying Mom's status. For large account activity. I didn't understand yet what that meant. I understand now that it was the first thread of something my mother had been pulling. Quietly. From a hospital bed. Weeks before any of us knew there was anything to pull. By the third week, Mom had stopped eating almost entirely. The doctors used the word transitioning. That's a soft word for a hard thing. I kept the notebook going anyway. Not because I thought it would matter to anyone. Because it was the only thing left I knew how to do with my hands. Brooke's visits got shorter and stranger. She'd hold Mom's hand for exactly as long as it took to say something warm out loud. Then she'd ask me to step out. Every single time. "Can you check if they refilled her water pitcher, Dana? Can you see if the nurse has an update?" Small errands. harmless sounding. I did them because I was raised to be useful. Some stubborn part of me still wanted to believe my sister just needed a private minute with our dying mother. I stepped out on a Wednesday. 12 minutes later, I came back. Brooke was on her phone in the hallway outside Mom's door. Her voice pitched low. "No, I need it by Friday," she was saying. "The lender's not going to wait past Friday." She hung up when she saw me, smiled the smile. "Vendor stuff," she said. "Spa things. Boring." I wrote it down. Wednesday, 2:40 p.m. Brooke on the phone. "The lender's not going to wait past Friday." I didn't know yet what lender she meant. I didn't know what Friday deadline she was racing. I only knew one thing. My sister ran a business with her name in gold cursive on the window. She had never once mentioned a lender to me. 15 years of Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings, and never once. Brooke didn't talk about money trouble. As far as any of us had ever been told, Brooke didn't have money trouble. She drove a new SUV every 3 years. She posted pictures from Turks and Caicos every February. I called my aunt, Rosalind, that night, mostly because I needed to say the strange sentence out loud to someone. Rosalind was Mom's younger sister, sharp-tongued, retired from the school district, the kind of woman who noticed things. "Brooke's spa's been struggling for 2 years," Rosalind told me. Flat, like she was surprised I didn't already know. "Kurt told your Uncle Dale at Easter. Something about a loan against the building. I figured your mother knew." I sat with that for a long moment. My mother, dying in a bed 40 feet from where I stood, apparently knew something about my sister's finances that I didn't. The daughter who never left her side, and I didn't know. "Does Mom talk to you about money?" I asked Rosalind. "Your mother," Rosalind said, "has talked to exactly one person about money in the last 30 years. It isn't me. It isn't Brooke. It's Walter Keene." I wrote that down too, later. Back in the hospice room, in the dim light from the hallway. Rosalind. "Mom only talks money to Walter." Underlined twice. The next morning, a Thursday, I finally opened my mouth about the withdrawal slips. Not to Brooke, to Mom. She was awake, barely, propped against 3 pillows. Her eyes found mine and held them, the way they used to when I was small and had done something she needed to correct without raising her voice. "Mom," I said, "Brooke's taking money out. A lot of it. I don't understand what's happening." She was quiet long enough that I thought she'd drifted off again. Then her hand found mine, weak but certain. "I know," she said. "Let her. Mom, Dana." Her voice cracked but held. "I need you to trust me on this one thing. Just this one thing. Can you do that?" I'd trusted my mother my whole life. It had never once cost me anything before. I said yes. I didn't know how to say anything else to a woman with 6 weeks left, maybe less. Her hand felt like a bird's wing in mine. "Good girl," she said, the way she used to when I finished my homework without being told. Then she closed her eyes. I sat there for a long time, not understanding, not asking again. I want to tell you honestly, this was the hardest part of the whole 3 weeks. Harder than the diagnosis. Harder than the sound her breathing made in the last days. Watching my sister walk out of that hospice room with our mother's money. Being told by the one person whose approval I'd chased my entire life to just let it happen. Quietly. Without a fight. I didn't know yet that letting it happen was the fight. Carol Ann noticed I'd gone quiet over the next few days. One morning, over her thermos of coffee, she asked me straight out what was wrong. I told her, all of it. The withdrawal slips on the blanket, the lender comment in the hallway, Mom's flat, strange instruction to let Brooke take it. Carol Ann didn't look surprised. She looked, if anything, like she'd been waiting for me to say it out loud. "Your mother filed papers for 31 years, Carol Ann said. You think a woman who spent 3 decades reading other people's wills doesn't know how to write her own? What are you saying? I'm saying, Carol Ann said, folding her crossword closed, that Marlene Boyd has never done a single careless thing in her life. Not once. Not since I've known her. And I've known her since Reagan was president. If she's telling you to let something happen, Dana, I'd bet my house she already knows exactly how it ends. I didn't fully believe her, not yet. But I wrote it down. By then, writing things down was the only way I had left to hold on to them. 2 days after that conversation, Walter Keene himself came to the hospice, not a phone call this time. He walked in on a Friday afternoon in a gray overcoat. He carried nothing but a slim leather folio. He asked the nurse at the front desk if he could have 5 minutes with Marlene Boyd privately. I was in the hallway when he came out. He looked older than I remembered, tired around the eyes. He stopped when he saw me. "Dana," he said, "you've grown up." "Mr. Keene, Walter's fine." He hesitated. He glanced back toward the closed door, then back at me. "Your mother is a remarkable woman. I hope you know that. I do." "Good." He adjusted his coat. Something in his face shifted. Some professional wall coming down for just a second. "Whatever you see over these next few weeks, Dana, whatever it looks like, I need you to trust that your mother thought about this longer and harder than anyone gives her credit for." That's what Carol Ann said. Walter almost smiled. "Carol Ann's smarter than half the people who've ever sat across my desk." Then the wall went back up. He was Walter Keene, branch manager again, straightening his tie, nodding once before he walked out to his car. I stood in that hallway for a long time after he left, turning his words over. Whatever it looks like, trust that she thought about it. Everyone around me seemed to know something I didn't. Every single one of them was telling me the same thing in a different voice. Don't fight this. Not yet. That Friday night, Brooke came by again, later than usual, past visiting hours. The nurse let her in because Brooke had a way of making rules feel optional when she wanted something. She sat with Mom for almost 40 minutes this time, longer than any visit that whole month. I stayed in my cot by the window, pretending to read, listening. I heard Mom's voice, thin but clear. "You'll take care of things." "Of course, Mom." Brooke's voice, warm, practiced. "I always do." "Good," Mom said. And then, quieter, almost to herself, "That's what I'm counting on." I wrote it down in the dark by the light of my phone. My hand was shaking slightly. That's what I'm counting on. Not a blessing. Not comfort. Something colder and more deliberate. The way my mother used to talk about a trap she'd set for a raccoon getting into the trash cans on Ridenour Street. Patient. Certain the raccoon would come back exactly when she expected it to. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay on the cot listening to my mother's breathing change. Slower. More labored. I thought about the envelope in my coat pocket, still sealed, still waiting for a day after a funeral I wasn't ready to imagine yet. 19 days after Brooke first spread those withdrawal slips across the blanket, my mother's accounts held $412. Just that, across all three, at Lakemore Savings and Trust. I know the number because I would see it myself in black and white less than a week later, sitting across a desk from Walter Keene in a room that smelled like carpet cleaner and old paper. $239,588. Gone. Wired. In 6 separate transfers to an account with Brooke's name on it. I didn't know that number yet. Not on the night I'm describing. I only knew that my mother's breathing had changed. A nurse named Priya was standing very still in the doorway. She had an expression I recognized from every hospital drama I'd ever half-watched. I never believed it would apply to my own life. My mother, Marlene Boyd, died at 4:17 in the morning, 3 days before Thanksgiving, my hand in hers. My sister 35 minutes away in Columbus, asleep. I did not call Brooke right away. I sat there for almost an hour, just holding my mother's hand after it had gone still. Some part of me understood that, even in the fog of that grief. This was the last quiet moment I would get before everything else began. When I finally reached for my coat to leave, the envelope crinkled against my ribs, right where it had been for 3 weeks. Don't open it. Take it to Walter. The day after you bury me. I had one more day to wait. I didn't know yet that my mother had spent her final lucid month building something none of us could see. Something that would turn every withdrawal slip Brooke had ever smiled over into evidence against herself. The funeral was small. Marlene Boyd had outlived most of her friends. She'd outworked the rest. The people who came to Daleford Community Church that Saturday were mostly from the county clerk's office, women in their 60s and 70s. They remembered her as the one who never lost a file in 3 decades. Carol Ann sat in the second pew. Walter Keene came in his gray overcoat. He sat near the back. He left before the reception without a word to anyone. Brooke wore black Chanel. She cried beautifully at the podium. Some of those tears, I think, were real. She talked about Mom's strength, her sacrifices, the way she'd raised 2 girls alone on a county clerk's salary. She used the word selfless twice. She did not mention withdrawal slips, or a lender, or a Friday deadline. Neither did I. I stood at the podium after her and said almost nothing. I read a short passage Mom had once underlined in her own Bible, about a woman who worked with willing hands. I did not cry either. Not there. Not in front of the room. I'd used up whatever tears I had in that hospice room. Quietly, over 3 weeks, where nobody was watching. After the burial, we had a small reception in the church basement, folding tables, casserole dishes with masking tape name labels. Brooke found me by the coffee urn. "We should talk about the house," she said. No preamble. She was holding a paper cup of decaf. "And Mom's accounts. I know it's soon, but Kurt says we should get ahead of probate." "There's not much left to get ahead of," I said. It was the first time I'd said anything close to the truth out loud to her. Brooke's face did something complicated. A flicker I couldn't quite read. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Mom's accounts are basically empty, Brooke. You've been there every time it happened." She set the paper cup down harder than she needed to. "I don't know what you're implying, Dana, but Mom wanted to make sure things were handled before." She stopped herself. "Before the end, I was helping her handle things. Handle them into an account with your name on it." I don't know where that sentence came from. It wasn't planned. 3 weeks of silence. 3 weeks of writing times in a notebook instead of asking the questions out loud. It finally cracked open right there, over a folding table of casseroles. Brooke's jaw tightened. For just a second, I saw something under the leather folder composure. Something scared. Then it was gone, replaced by the practiced warmth she used on spa clients who complained about a bill. "You've always resented that Mom trusted me with things," she said, quiet enough that only I could hear it. "I'm not going to fight with you about this at her funeral, Dana. Grow up." She walked away before I could answer. I stood by the coffee urn for a long moment. My hands were shaking slightly. I thought about the envelope waiting in my coat pocket. I thought about Walter's gray overcoat disappearing out the church door before the reception even started. I went to Lakemore Savings and Trust the next morning. A Sunday quiet Monday. The parking lot half empty, frost still silvering the grass along Sentinel Street. I hadn't slept much. I'd barely eaten. I carried the envelope in both hands like it might break. Walter was waiting for me. Not by accident, I understood later. He'd told the front desk to send me straight back the moment I arrived. No waiting room, no forms. His office was small, wood-paneled, a single window looking out on the parking lot. A framed photo on his desk showed a younger Walter shaking hands with a man I didn't recognize at some long-ago bank event. He gestured for me to sit. Before I'd even settled into the chair, he reached over and shut the door. "You have it," he said. Not a question. I pulled the envelope from my coat. I set it on the desk between us. My name in Mom's careful handwriting. Dana. Still sealed. Walter looked at it for a long moment without touching it. "Do you know what's in it?" "No. She told me not to open it until now." He nodded slowly, like that confirmed something he'd already suspected. "Your mother came to me in early November," he said, "about 6 weeks before she passed. She was already sick by then, but she was sharp. Sharper than most people I deal with who aren't dying." "What did she want?" Walter opened a drawer. He pulled out a slim folder of his own, official-looking, a bank letterhead visible at the top. She wanted to talk about her accounts. All of them. She asked me a question I don't get asked very often. He paused. She asked me how much money someone would have to take, and how fast, before it stopped looking like a mistake and started looking like theft. I felt something cold move through my chest. Why would she ask that? "Because," Walter said, "she already knew your sister was going to try to take it. She'd known for months. Kurt Tanner had come in himself back in the summer, trying to get information about Marlene's accounts under the pretense of helping with her care planning." I turned him away. "Bank policy. But your mother heard about it before I even had the chance to tell her." I sat very still. Outside the window, a delivery truck idled at the curb, its exhaust curled white in the cold. So she knew. This whole time. She knew, Walter said. And she made a decision I don't see very often. She decided to let it happen. Why would she do that? Walter slid the bank folder an inch closer to me. He didn't open it yet. Because she wanted proof. Real proof. The kind that holds up. Not a suspicion. Not a family argument at Thanksgiving. She told me, and I remember this almost word for word. "If I stop her now, she'll just find another way. Quieter. I'll never catch her at it. Let her think she's getting away with something. Let her show everyone exactly who she is." I thought of the withdrawal slips fanned across the hospice blanket. She won't need it where she's going. I thought of Mom's hand in mine, the flat instruction. "Let her take it, Dana. Let her." Every strange, painful moment of the last 3 weeks rearranged itself in front of me. For the first time, I understood something. I hadn't been watching my mother lose a fight. I'd been watching her set one up. "The accounts Brooke emptied," I said slowly. "They weren't. They were real money," Walter said. "Real, and it's really gone, and your sister really took it. None of that is undone by what I'm about to tell you. But those 3 accounts were never the whole picture. Your mother restructured everything in early November. A 4th account. One Brooke never knew existed. Funded through a small annuity your mother had quietly held since 1996. She never once mentioned it to either of you. $211,000. Transfer on death, naming a single beneficiary. He finally opened the folder. He turned it toward me. I saw my own name typed cleanly at the top of a bank document. Beneficiary, Dana Marie Boyd. "There's more," Walter said. He reached again for the sealed envelope still sitting untouched between us. "I think it's time you read what your mother actually wrote." My hands were not steady when I picked it up. I turned it over once, twice. Finally, I slid a finger under the flap. I broke the seal my mother had pressed closed with her own careful hands. Weeks before she died. Already 3 moves ahead of a daughter she loved enough to protect. And a daughter she'd learned, with a clarity that must have broken her heart, she could no longer trust. Inside was a single folded sheet of her stationery, the same pale blue she'd used for 30 years of birthday cards. At the top was her handwriting, steadier than I expected from a woman that sick. 4 words. They made my throat close before I'd read anything else. My Dana. Read carefully. My Dana, read carefully. By the time you read this, I will be gone. Your sister will already have taken more than I ever meant to let her take. I want you to understand something. I did not fail to stop her. I let her. I found out about Brooke's spa loans in June. Kurt let it slip to your Uncle Dale. He is worse at keeping secrets than either of you ever were as children. $210,000 borrowed against the building. Personally guaranteed. A balloon payment due this winter. Brooke has known for over a year that she cannot make that payment. She has also known, for exactly as long, that I was sick. And that I had savings. I want to tell you what she did with that knowledge. I think you deserve to know it plainly. The way I would have written it up for the county if it had crossed my desk 30 years ago. In September, 2 weeks after my diagnosis, Brooke asked me to add her name to my accounts, in case something happens fast. I said yes. I want you to know I said yes with my eyes open. I have read 1,000 documents in my life, Dana. I know what a joint account means. I know what it means when your own daughter asks for one 3 days after hearing you might die. I let her add her name. Then I quietly built something else behind it. Something she never knew was there. Here is what I need you to understand. I know you, and I know you'll want to feel guilty for not stopping her yourself. You could not have stopped her, Dana. You were doing the only job that mattered in that room, making sure I was not alone. Somebody had to hold my hand. Somebody had to watch the money. I decided a long time ago which daughter would do which job. I decided it because I trust you completely, and because I needed Brooke to feel completely unwatched. I am not proud of using her greed as a tool, but I have spent 31 years filing the paperwork of families who tore each other apart over money. Money that was never worth what it cost them. I was not going to let that happen to my own girls without at least trying to make the ending mean something. The 4th account is yours. All of it. $211,000, held quietly since 1996. From an annuity your father left before he passed. I never told either of you it existed. I did not want it spent before it was needed. It transfers to you outside of probate, the day Walter confirms my death. There is nothing Brooke or her lawyer or anyone else can do to touch it. I made certain of that in November, with a lawyer named Preston Vance in Columbus. He has no connection to our family, and nothing to gain from either of you. I also want you to have the house on Ridenour Street. It is not worth much, Dana, but it is paid for. It is where I raised you. I think you are the only one of my daughters who will ever understand why that matters more than the number on a check. As for Brooke, I have already reported the withdrawal pattern to the bank's compliance department. Walter has a paper trail going back to September. Every transfer, every date, every dollar. What she did is not a family disagreement. It is elder financial exploitation. Ohio has laws about it that do not care how much you loved your mother when you were doing it. I do not know exactly what will happen to her. I know it will not be nothing. I do not say this with joy, Dana. I loved Brooke every day of her life, the same as I loved you. Even when loving her meant watching her become someone I had to plan around instead of someone I could simply trust. I hope someday she finds her way to being a different kind of person. I hope you do not carry hatred for her longer than it serves you. But I was not willing to let her mistake my dying for an opportunity and walk away from it clean. One more thing. You asked me once, when you were maybe 9, why I kept every piece of paper in a house that barely had room for furniture. I told you paperwork was love that hadn't been read yet. I want you to know I meant that both ways. The love in the paper I filed for strangers for 31 years. And the love in the paper I am leaving for you now. Take care of the house. Take care of yourself. And Dana. When this is over, do not let anyone tell you that keeping records instead of raising your voice makes you the quiet daughter, the lesser one. It made you the one I could trust with everything that mattered. I love you. I always did the arithmetic in your favor, even when it didn't look like it. Mom. I read it twice before I could speak. Walter sat across from me in silence. He let me have the time, his hands folded on the desk, the way I imagined he'd folded them across from 100 grieving families before me. She came to you in November, I finally said, for all of this. She came to me the day after your diagnosis conversation with the doctors, Walter said. Before that, even. She'd suspected something about Brooke's spa for over a year. When the diagnosis came, she told me she didn't have time left to hope she was wrong. She needed to know for certain. And she needed a plan that would hold up in a courtroom if it had to, and the withdrawal slips. All of it. She let that happen on purpose. She let it happen because stopping Brooke quietly would have meant a fight, a family rupture, accusations with no proof behind them. Walter tapped the folder gently. She wanted a record. She used to tell me back when she worked at the courthouse that the difference between a suspicion and a case was documentation. She built a case, Dana, meticulously, for 6 weeks, while she was dying. I thought about my own notebook then, still in my coat pocket. Blue cover, coffee ring, 3 weeks of doses and visitors and stray sentences I hadn't understood the weight of when I wrote them. Let her take it, Dana. Let her. That's what I'm counting on. Whatever you see over these next few weeks, trust that she thought about it. There's something else you should see, Walter said. He turned his computer monitor toward me. On the screen was a spreadsheet, dense with dates and dollar amounts, 6 columns wide. This is every transfer out of your mother's accounts over the last 19 days of her life, cross-referenced against the bank's security camera logs and the account access records. I scanned the dates. November 18th, the day I'd stepped out for coffee at Brooke's request. The day I came back to find her on the phone about a lender. November 22nd, a Sunday. The day Mom told me to let her take it. Each transfer lined up almost exactly with a visit I had documented in my own notebook. You compared them, I said. I didn't have to, Walter said. Your mother already had. She kept a copy of your notebook. I stared at him. What? She asked you to read your entries out loud to her most evenings, do you remember? She said it helped her track the day. I did remember. I'd thought it was comfort. A dying woman wanting the small rhythms of her days repeated back to her before sleep. I understood now it had been something else entirely. She had been building her own record, cross-checking mine, confirming with her own eyes exactly when her daughter walked out of the room, and exactly what happened while she was gone. She used me, I said. It came out flatter than I meant it to, more surprised than hurt. She used your honesty, Walter said gently. There's a difference. I think if you sit with it, you'll find it matters. I sat with it. Outside, the delivery truck had finally pulled away from the curb. The parking lot was quiet again, frost starting to melt in the thin winter sun. I thought about my mother, 31 years behind a filing desk, watching other families destroy each other over inheritances and grudges and greed, deciding in the last 6 weeks of her life that her own daughters would not get to write that story about her. What happens now? I asked. Walter closed the folder. Now, he said, we go see an attorney named Preston Vance. Your mother left very specific instructions. About what happens next. Some of it, Dana, is going to happen faster than you think. Before I left Walter's office that first Monday, the letter still trembling slightly in my hands, he told me one more thing. I've carried it with me since. Your mother asked me a strange question back in November, he said. She asked whether the bank could hold a small keepsake for her, something outside of any account, just in a safe deposit box, to be given to you specifically after everything else was settled. I told her that wasn't standard. For Marlene, I made an exception. He opened a different drawer, smaller. He set a flat velvet box on the desk between us. Inside was a plain gold locket, worn soft at the edges, the kind of piece that had clearly been handled and loved for decades, not kept pristine in a drawer. This was your grandmother's, Walter said. Your mother told me it was the only thing of any real value that never once showed up on a bank statement or a will. She said some things aren't supposed to be traced. They're just supposed to be given. I opened the locket carefully. Inside were two tiny photographs, faded almost to sepia. My grandmother as a young woman. Beside her, a baby I recognized after a moment as my mother herself. Sometime in the early 1960s, before any of the rest of us had even been imagined yet. She wanted you to have this before you read the letter, Walter said. She said the money would explain what she did. She wanted this to explain why. I held that locket the whole drive home. The metal was warm from my palm by the time I finally pulled into the driveway on Ridenour Street. I understood, holding it, that my mother had thought of nearly everything, right down to making sure there'd still be one small, unaccountable thing somewhere in the middle of the documents and the felony statutes. Something simply about love. No ledger attached to it at all. I wear that locket most days now. I was wearing it, in fact, the morning of the reading, tucked under my collar where no one else could see it. A small private weight against my collarbone the entire time Preston laid out the case against my sister. I think my mother would have liked that. The proof in one hand, the love in the other, both of them true at the same time, neither one canceling out the other. Preston Vance's office sat above a shuttered shoe store on High Street in Columbus. A narrow staircase led up to two rooms that smelled like toner and old coffee. He was younger than I expected, maybe 45, reading glasses pushed up into gray-streaked hair. His handshake felt like he actually meant it. Your mother was one of the most organized clients I've ever had, he said, once Walter and I were seated across from his desk. And I say that having handled estates for judges. He opened a thick folder, tabbed and labeled in a system I recognized instantly. Mom's handwriting, even in her filing labels. TOD account, annuity 1996, property deed, Ridenour, compliance report, Lakemore. Let's start with the property, Preston said. The house on Ridenour Street was deeded to you outright in November, Dana. Not through the will. A direct transfer, recorded at the county recorder's office 3 weeks before your mother passed. It is not part of the estate. It is not subject to probate. Brooke doesn't know, I said. It wasn't a question. I already understood the answer. Brooke doesn't know, Preston confirmed. Your mother was very specific that this conversation happen after the funeral, and only with you present first. He slid a second document across the desk. The annuity account, the $211,000 your father left in 1996, transfers to you as sole beneficiary the moment we file this death certificate, which I can do this afternoon. That money was never in Brooke's reach. It was never even in the same institution. Your mother moved it to a separate credit union in Newark, Ohio, specifically so it couldn't be found through a routine record search at Lakemore. She thought of everything, I said. She thought of most things, Preston said. The one thing she couldn't control was how much of the visible money Brooke would actually take before your mother passed. She hoped it would stay under 100,000. It didn't. $239,588 across 6 transfers. The last one 4 days before your mother's death. I felt my stomach turn over. That exact number, said out loud, in a lawyer's quiet office. The same way it might someday be read out loud in a courtroom. What happens to that money? I asked. That, Preston said, is where the compliance report matters. He turned to Walter, who took over. Ohio law is clear on this, Walter said. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, particularly one under hospice care with a documented terminal diagnosis, is a felony above a certain dollar threshold. $239,000 clears that threshold by a wide margin. The bank is obligated to report it. I already have. To who? Adult Protective Services first. That's mandatory under state law the moment a bank flags suspected elder exploitation. From there, given the dollar amount, it goes to the county prosecutor's financial crimes unit. I've worked with them before. They move slowly on paperwork. They move fast once they have documentation this clean. How clean? Preston answered that one. Your mother kept a written log of every conversation she had about her accounts from September onward. Dates, times, what was said, who was present. Combined with the bank's transaction records and your own notebook, this isn't a case built on suspicion, Dana. Your mother specifically referenced that notebook to me, by name, in our first meeting. It's built on 3 independent records. All of them agree with each other down to the hour. I sat back in the hard office chair, trying to absorb the size of what I was hearing. My mother, dying, filing a case against her own daughter. The same patience and precision she'd once used to file a stranger's deed. Does Brooke know any of this yet? I asked. No, Preston said. And that's actually the next thing we need to discuss. Your mother left instructions about how this should unfold. She was specific that you have a choice in it, Dana. You're not required to let this play out exactly the way she planned. It's your money now, your house, your decision what happens next. What did she want? Preston pulled one more sheet from the folder. I recognized the pale blue stationery before he even turned it toward me. Another letter, shorter this time. Dana, if you're reading this with Walter and Preston, it means the accounts are gone. It means I am too. You're deciding what to do about your sister. I want you to know there is no wrong answer here. You could let Preston file everything quietly and let the state handle Brooke through whatever process it decides. You could let it stay private, a family matter resolved with lawyers instead of courtrooms. Or you could do what I would have done at your age. Let her stand in a room and hear the truth out loud, in front of the people who matter, before the law ever gets involved. I built the case either way. What you do with it is yours to decide. I trust you completely, which is the whole reason any of this worked. Love, Mom. I read it twice, the same way I'd read the first letter. Something settled in my chest that I hadn't expected. Not vengeance, not even quite justice yet. Something closer to permission. There's a reading of the will scheduled for next week, I said slowly. Brooke set it up herself, actually, before any of this. She thinks it's a formality. She thinks she's already gotten what she wanted. Preston and Walter exchanged a look. If you want, Preston said carefully, I can attend that reading. Your mother's official will, the one Brooke has seen, is a simple document. It divides the estate's remaining assets equally between the two of you. It says nothing about the annuity, the 4th account, or the house, because none of those were ever part of the estate to begin with. Brooke will expect to hear that the accounts are empty. She'll expect to split what's left, which is close to nothing. She won't expect me to be there. She certainly won't expect what else I'll be bringing with me. The compliance report, I said. The compliance report, Preston agreed. And if you're comfortable with it, the bank's documentation of the 6 transfers, dated and time-stamped, alongside your notebook, which your mother asked me to specifically request from you for exactly this purpose. I thought about Brooke at the funeral. Black Chanel, real tears. Then the flicker of fear I'd seen under the composure over the coffee urn when I'd finally said the sentence out loud. Handle them into an account with your name on it? I thought about 19 days of stepping out of a hospice room to get coffee, while my sister emptied our dying mother's life savings into her own name to save a business built on a lie of prosperity. Do it, I said. The reading, all of it, in front of everyone. Walter nodded once, like he'd expected that answer and respected it. Preston made a note in the folder. There's one more thing, Preston said, glancing at Walter before continuing. Your mother left specific instructions about who should be present at the reading beyond the immediate family. She wanted your Aunt Rosalind there. She wanted Carol Ann Ives there, as a witness to your caregiving during the illness, which will matter for reasons I'll explain later. And she wanted one more person present. Someone Brooke doesn't know is involved yet. Who? A representative from Lakemoor's compliance department, Walter said. Not me. Someone from the regional office. So it doesn't look like I'm simply protecting a longtime customer's family out of personal loyalty. Someone whose only job in that room is to confirm what the bank's investigation found. On the record. I left the office that afternoon carrying a folder almost as thick as the one Preston kept. My own copy of everything. The annuity paperwork. The deed to the Ridenour Street house. A photocopy of my mother's 2 letters. I drove home in the gray Ohio dusk, the heater rattling, the radio off. For the first time since my mother's diagnosis in September, I let myself cry. Not for what Brooke had done, for the sheer, exhausting scale of what my mother had done to protect me from it. Alone, dying, in a hospital bed, while everyone around her assumed she was simply fading. Before I left, Walter walked me to my car in the cold. He didn't say much, just that he'd see me at the reading, and that I should try to eat something before then, because grief and hunger together made people say things they didn't mean. I told him I'd try. I didn't. Not really. Not that first night. But I appreciated that he'd noticed I probably wouldn't. I called Carol Ann that night. She answered on the second ring, like she'd been waiting. She told me a little, Carol Ann admitted, once I'd explained. Not everything. Enough that I've been holding my breath for you for about 3 weeks. Why didn't you say something? Because she asked me not to, Carol Ann said simply. And because, Dana, honestly, I don't think you would have believed me. I think you needed to hear it from her. In her own words, in her own time. Your mother always did understand people better than she let on. I thought about that long after we hung up. My whole life, I had thought of myself as the quiet daughter, the useful one, the one who did the work nobody noticed while Brooke did the things that got remembered. I was starting to understand that my mother had seen something in that quietness the rest of the family had missed entirely. Not weakness, patience. The kind of patience that could hold a notebook steady for 3 weeks while a house came apart around her, then hand that notebook over at exactly the right moment to bring the whole thing back into order. I didn't know yet how loud that quiet patience was about to sound in a room full of relatives expecting a simple will reading. I only knew that for the first time in 3 weeks, I wasn't dreading what came next. I was ready for it. I want to tell you about one more visit before the reading. I think it explains something about my mother that the letters alone don't quite capture. 4 days before the will was read, I drove to the cemetery on the edge of town. That plain stone with her name and dates, nothing more. exactly the way she'd specified in funeral instructions she'd apparently filed away years in advance. Preston found the folder later, labeled simply, End of Life. I hadn't been back since the burial. I wasn't sure I was ready. Something about the week ahead made me feel like I needed to say something to her, even if she couldn't hear it. I stood there a long time in the cold. The grass was still patchy and raw where the ground had been disturbed. I told her, out loud, feeling foolish and not caring, that I understood now. The notebook. The reading of my entries every evening that I'd thought was comfort. The strange instruction to let Brooke take it. I told her I'd found the folder on the kitchen table and the letters. I told her I was going to do exactly what she'd asked. No more and no less. The reading, the truth laid out plainly, then whatever the law decided to do with it. I didn't cry there either. I want you to understand that about me, if you've been following along this whole time. I am not a woman who performs grief well. Even alone, even at a graveside with no one watching. I inherited that from her too, I think, along with the notebook habit, along with the belief that paperwork, properly kept, is its own kind of love letter. What I did instead was talk to her the way I used to when I was small, telling her about my day, the ordinary details she used to ask for every evening at that same yellow Formica table. I told her about my classroom, about a boy named Tyler Pruitt, who'd finally mastered his multiplication tables the week before. The same boy she'd asked about from her hospice bed in one of her last lucid afternoons. I told her the daffodil bulbs she'd planted years ago were already pushing up through the cold ground near the porch, early for the season, stubborn the way she'd always been. Then, because I couldn't help myself, I told her about the fear I still carried, standing there. Not fear of Brooke, not exactly. Fear that I'd get it wrong somehow, that I'd either go too soft on my sister out of old habit, or too hard out of something uglier I didn't want to admit to feeling. I asked her, out loud, to the cold stone and the raw grass, what she would have wanted me to do if the moment came and I genuinely didn't know. I didn't get an answer, obviously. I'm not going to pretend some voice came to me on the wind or some sign appeared in the clouds. What I got instead was a memory, unbidden. Her voice from years earlier, long before any of this, back when I was maybe 22. I'd come to her furious about a coworker who'd taken credit for a lesson plan I'd spent a month developing. You don't have to be loud to be right, Dana, she'd told me then, stirring a pot of something on the stove without even turning around. You just have to be accurate. Accurate outlasts loud every single time. Loud burns out. Accurate just sits there, patient, waiting for somebody to finally check the math. I stood at her grave and laughed, a small, surprised sound in the cold quiet. I understood, finally, that she'd been training me for this exact moment for years, decades even, one small, unremarkable lesson at a time, long before either of us had any idea what it would eventually be used for. I drove home that afternoon. For the first time since the funeral, I opened the manila folder on the kitchen table, not out of duty or grief this time, out of something closer to appreciation. I read through her timeline page by page slowly, really reading it this time. I noticed the small human details she'd included that weren't strictly necessary for a legal case. A note that Brooke had seemed genuinely tired one Tuesday. Dark circles under her eyes. Worth documenting because your mother wanted the full picture, not just the damning parts. A line acknowledging that Kurt had once, years earlier, helped fix the gutters on the Riddenor house without being asked. She hadn't forgotten it, even now. My mother had built an airtight case against her own daughter. Somewhere inside that airtight case, she had still found room to be fair. That, I think, more than anything else in this entire story, is the truest measure of who she was. Not a woman seeking vengeance from a hospital bed, a woman refusing, even at the very end of her life, to let injustice make her small or mean or careless with the truth. Even when the truth was about to cost someone she loved everything. On the drive home from the cemetery, I stopped at the drugstore on Route 9, the same one where I'd bought that first spiral notebook 3 weeks before Mom died. I bought another one, identical. Blue cover, 79 cents. I sat in the parking lot for a while before I drove off, turning it over in my hands, thinking about how strange that was. The cheapest object in that entire store. And it mattered more to a $240,000 case than anything a lawyer or a bank had produced. 2 days before the reading, Rosalind came by the Ridenour house, a casserole dish nobody had asked for, and a question that had clearly been sitting on her for a while. "Are you sure about this, Dana?" she asked, standing in the kitchen doorway, still in her coat. The full reading, in front of everyone. You could still do this quietly. Preston could handle it privately with Brooke's lawyer. No audience, no scene. I thought about that for a long moment before I answered. Mom built the case in the open, I finally said. Not because she wanted a scene, because she wanted it undeniable. If we do this quietly, in 6 months Brooke tells a version of the story where she was misunderstood, where Mom was confused, where I'm the cold daughter who turned a family tragedy into a lawsuit. I'm not going to let that happen. Not because I want to hurt her, because Mom deserves the truth told once, clearly, where everyone who matters can hear it and never be confused about it again. Rosalind nodded slowly. She set the casserole down on the counter. "Your mother would be proud of that answer," she said. "She'd also tell you not to enjoy it too much when it happens. She never did like people who enjoyed being right more than they respected being accurate." "I know," I said. "I'm not planning to enjoy it. I'm planning to survive it." I called Preston one last time that evening, just to confirm the order of documents for the morning. He walked me through it patiently. The compliance report first, then the email, then only if I wanted it, Mom's own words read into the record. He asked gently if I was certain. Certain I wanted to be the one to say the hardest lines out loud, instead of leaving them to him. I told him yes. Some things, I said, a daughter has to say herself, or they don't mean what they're supposed to mean. I didn't sleep well that final night before the reading. I didn't expect to. I lay awake going over the folder in my mind one more time. The timeline, the compliance report, the printed email, my own notebook waiting in the drawer beside my bed. I thought about my mother's hand in mine, 3 weeks before she died, thin and certain, telling me to trust her on just this one thing. I had trusted her, every difficult, confusing, silent day of it. In the morning, I would finally understand exactly what that trust had been building toward. So would everyone else in that room. The week before the reading, I went back to Ridenour Street for the first time since the funeral. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The way childhood houses always do. The clapboard siding needed paint. The porch light Mom had never replaced was still burned out from October. I let myself in with my own key, the same key I'd carried since I was 12. I stood in the front hallway for a long time before I could make myself walk further inside. Everything smelled like her. Lemon oil on the furniture, the particular dust of a house that had been closed up for 3 weeks. I walked through the kitchen, past the yellow Formica table. She used to sit there with a calculator and a stack of bills every first of the month. Sitting square in the center of that table was a manila folder with my name written across the top in her handwriting. Dana. My hands were shaking again when I opened it. Inside were photocopies, dozens of them, organized with tabs the way only a 31-year records clerk would think to organize her own private paperwork. Bank statements going back to June. A handwritten timeline of every conversation she'd had with Brooke about money. Dated, with direct quotes. A copy of Kurt Tanner's loan application, which I still don't know how she obtained, showing the balloon payment due date. December 14th, 6 days before Brooke had started fanning withdrawal slips across a hospice blanket. Underneath all of it was a single index card, the kind she used to keep grocery lists on, with one more line in her handwriting. I filed 31 years of other people's messes. I was not going to leave you one of my own. Everything you need is here. Use it or don't. Either way, you were never the daughter I worried about. I sat at that yellow Formica table for almost an hour, going through the timeline page by page. It matched my own notebook almost exactly, entry for entry, sometimes down to the same 10-minute window. My mother had been running her own parallel investigation the entire time I thought I was simply keeping a caregiver's log. She'd cross-referenced my honest, unremarkable notes against bank withdrawal timestamps she must have requested from Walter in secret, building in the margins of her dying an airtight case against her own oldest daughter. I found something else in that folder that changed the shape of everything. A single sheet near the back that wasn't in Mom's handwriting at all. It was a printed email, dated back in October, from Kurt Tanner's personal account to an address I didn't recognize. A loan officer named Reyes at a commercial lending company in Columbus. The subject line read, "Bridge financing, confidential." The body was 3 sentences long. "We should have access to the inheritance funds by mid-December at the latest. My wife's mother is terminal and the estate transfer is a formality at this point. Please hold the balloon extension offer open through the end of the year on that basis." I read it 4 times. Brooke and Kurt hadn't just taken advantage of a dying woman's accounts out of panic. They had planned it. Months in advance. They had used my mother's terminal diagnosis as collateral in a conversation with a lender before she had even finished her first round of treatment. They had told a bank in writing that her death was a business opportunity with a predictable timeline. I don't know how my mother got that email. I never asked Walter directly, though I have a guess because Kurt banked at Lakemore too. And because my mother had 31 years of knowing exactly which favors to call in. Exactly which people in a small town owed her enough to bend a rule quietly, once, for a good reason. I decided not to ask. Some things I understood by then. My mother had earned the right to keep to herself. I called Preston that night and read him the email. There was a long pause on the line. "That changes the framing considerably," he said finally. "This isn't just a case of a family member taking advantage of proximity and opportunity during a health crisis. This is premeditated financial exploitation, discussed with a third-party lender weeks before your mother's condition had even been formally staged as terminal. That's a different conversation with the prosecutor's office. Will it hold up? Legally, I mean. It corroborates everything else," Preston said. "It removes any argument Brooke's attorney might try to make, that this was a spontaneous, emotional overreach during a family crisis. This shows intent. This shows planning. Juries and prosecutors both respond very differently to intent." I hung up and sat in my childhood kitchen for a long time after that, the manila folder open in front of me. My mother's timeline lined up beside my own notebook, the printed email sitting between them like a confession nobody had meant to leave behind. I thought about Brooke crying at the funeral podium, using the word selfless twice. I felt something in me go very quiet and very still. Not rage exactly, something colder and steadier than rage. My mother's kind of quiet, I understood now. The kind that plans instead of shouting. 3 days before the reading, Rosalind called me, agitated. "Brooke's been telling people the estate's basically settled," she said. "She told your Uncle Dale she's already talked to a realtor about the Ridenour house. Says she and Kurt want to list it in the spring. She doesn't know it's not part of the estate," I said. "She doesn't know a lot of things, apparently," Rosalind said. "But Dana, is it true? What Carol Ann's been hinting at? That your mother set something up?" I told Rosalind most of it, enough that she went quiet on the other end of the line for a long moment. "Your mother," Rosalind finally said, "was always the smartest person in every room she was ever underestimated in. I should have known she wasn't just going to lie there and let Brooke walk off with everything." "She wasn't dying quietly," I said. "She was building a case." "Same thing, with your mother," Rosalind said. "She never did anything quietly that wasn't also doing something else at the same time." The reading was scheduled for 10 in the morning at Preston Vance's office, the same narrow room above the shuttered shoe store, though this time a second, larger conference room down the hall had been arranged. Folding chairs added along the back wall. Rosalind arrived first, then Carol Ann. Then, a few minutes before 10, a woman I didn't recognize in a navy blazer, introduced simply as Ms. Ferris, from Lakemoor's Regional Compliance Office. She sat quietly near the door with a slim laptop bag and said almost nothing. That somehow made her presence feel heavier than if she'd announced herself. Rosalind arrived first, in a gray wool coat, and took a seat near the front without saying much. Carol Ann came a few minutes after, thermos in hand out of habit, even though there'd be no crossword today. She squeezed my shoulder once before sitting beside Rosalind. I watched the door after that, my hands cold in my lap, counting the minutes until 10. Brooke arrived at 10:04, 4 minutes late, Kurt trailing behind her in a suit that looked expensive and slightly too tight. She was wearing the same composed, warm expression she'd worn at the funeral podium, the one that photographed well and gave away nothing. "Sorry we're late," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "Traffic on 70. She glanced around the room. Rosalind, Carol Ann, the unfamiliar woman by the door. Something flickered across her face, quick and gone, before she settled into the chair Preston indicated. She settled into the chair Kurt pulled out for her, crossing her legs. She glanced once at the folding chairs along the back wall, like she was cataloging an audience rather than family. "This seems like a lot of people for a simple reading," she said, half laughing, glancing at me. "Mom wanted witnesses," I said. It was the first thing I'd said to her since the funeral reception. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Brooke's smile thinned slightly, but held. "Well, let's get started then. I have a client at noon." Walter took a seat quietly near the back, next to Ms. Ferris, and gave me one small nod before folding his hands in his lap. Preston opened the folder in front of him, the same tabbed, careful system Mom had used her whole life. I watched my sister settle back in her chair. Comfortable, certain. Already halfway to believing this was simply the last small errand standing between her and a debt she thought she'd already solved. She had no idea what was in the second folder. No idea about the printed email. No idea about the compliance report, or the woman in the navy blazer by the door. She hadn't said a single word yet. She wouldn't need to say very many before the morning was over. She checked her phone once more under the table. She glanced at the clock on the wall. She settled back into her chair like a woman waiting for a formality to finish, so she could get on with the rest of her day. Preston cleared his throat once, glanced at the clock, and waited until the last folding chair stopped scraping before he began. I sat with my hands folded in my lap. The locket was cool against my collarbone. My mother's second notebook waited untouched in my bag beside me. I could feel Rosalind's eyes on the side of my face. I did not turn to meet them. I kept my eyes on Preston's folder, on the tabs my mother had labeled herself. I thought one last time about her hand in mine 3 weeks before she died, thin and certain, asking me to trust her on just this one thing. Preston began the way any lawyer begins a reading, the formal language of Mom's official will, dated 4 years earlier. It divided the residual estate equally between my daughters, Dana Marie Boyd and Brooke Ann Tanner. Brooke nodded along, unsurprised, checking her phone once under the table before Kurt nudged her. As you're both aware, Preston continued, the primary liquid assets in this will were the 3 accounts at Lakemore Savings and Trust. He paused, folder still closed in front of him. As of the date of Marlene Boyd's death, those 3 accounts held a combined balance of $412. Brooke's expression didn't change. She'd clearly expected this part. Right, she said. Mom's medical bills at the end. Hospice isn't cheap. The withdrawals in question, Preston said, were not medical expenses. They were 6 wire transfers, $239,588 over 19 days, to an account held in your name, Mrs. Tanner. The room went very still. Rosalind's sharp intake of breath was the only sound. Brooke's composure held for one more second. Then it didn't. That money was for Mom's care, she said, too fast. Ongoing expenses. She asked me to manage things toward the end. She couldn't keep track of the accounts herself. She was lucid, I said. It was the first time I'd interrupted anyone in that room. My voice was quiet, but it carried. She was lucid enough to write 2 letters. She was lucid enough to tell me to my face 3 days before she died. She knew exactly what you were doing. Brooke turned to me. For the first time in my whole life, I watched real fear move across my sister's face. Not performance, not a flicker she could smooth over with a warm word. Fear. Dana, whatever you think you know. I know about the balloon payment, I said. December 14th, $210,000, personally guaranteed, against the spa building. I know Kurt told Uncle Dale about it at Easter. I know, because Mom knew too. Kurt shifted in his chair. His face went pale under the tan. Preston opened the second folder. I'd like to enter this into the record. A compliance report, filed by Lakemore Savings and Trust with Ohio Adult Protective Services, dated the week of Mrs. Boyd's hospitalization. It documents suspected financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. He nodded toward the woman in the navy blazer by the door. Miss Ferris stood, calm and unhurried, and spoke for the first time that morning. I'm here on behalf of Lakemore's Regional Compliance Office to confirm the bank's findings, she said. Our investigation identified 6 unauthorized or coerced transfers from Marlene Boyd's accounts, occurring during a documented period of terminal illness and hospice care. The transfers align precisely with visitation records at Birch Lane Hospice. They show Mrs. Tanner present, and periods during which the primary caregiver, Dana Boyd, was asked to leave the room. Coerced, Brooke said, her voice cracking on the word. She wasn't coerced, she offered. Brooke. My mother's word, out of my own mouth. Quiet and final. Stop. Brooke stopped. The whole room seemed to hold its breath with her. Preston pulled one more page from the folder. I recognized it before he even turned it toward the room. The printed email. 3 sentences long. Subject line: Bridge financing, confidential. I'd also like to enter this into the record, Preston said. An email from Kurt Tanner to a loan officer at a commercial lending institution, dated October 14th. I'll quote directly. We should have access to the inheritance funds by mid-December at the latest. My wife's mother is terminal, and the estate transfer is a formality at this point. Kurt made a sound low in his throat, somewhere between a protest and a groan. He put his face in his hands. Brooke stared at the paper in Preston's hands like it might disappear if she looked at it hard enough. That's not what it looks like. Kurt was just trying to reassure the lender. He wasn't. He told a bank, in writing, that your mother's death was a business opportunity with a predictable timeline, I said. 2 months before she died, while I was sitting by her bed every single night. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the building's old radiator. Brooke's mouth opened and closed once, twice. No sound coming out. I thought of the withdrawal slips fanned across the hospice blanket, the leather folder, the smile that never reached her eyes. She won't need it where she's going. I let the silence sit there for a moment longer than I needed to. For the first time in my life, I understood that silence could be a weapon instead of just a habit. Mom knew, I finally said. Quiet, steady. She knew before any of this started. She let it happen because she needed proof that would hold up, not just a family argument nobody would believe. She built this case herself, Brooke, in the last 6 weeks of her life, while you were counting the money. Brooke's face crumpled, finally, the composure gone entirely, replaced by something raw and frightened that I almost felt sorry for. Almost. She set me up, Brooke said, barely a whisper. She gave you every chance to stop, Preston said, not unkindly. The compliance flags at the bank alone would have alerted a more careful person that something was being tracked. Your mother wasn't hiding this from you to trap you cruelly, Mrs. Tanner. She was documenting a pattern, one she believed correctly that you would not stop on your own. Rosalind spoke up from her chair, her voice tight with a fury she'd clearly been holding since the moment the first document hit the table. $239,000, Brooke, from your dying mother, while your sister sat by that bed every single night for 3 weeks. I needed it, Brooke said. There was something almost pleading in her voice now. The performance gone entirely. The bank was going to call the loan. We were going to lose the building. Kurt said, tell the lender Mom was as good as dead and the money as good as yours, I said. I heard the email too, Brooke. She had no answer for that. Nobody in the room did. Not even Kurt, who sat with his face still buried in his hands, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume for a role he could no longer play. Preston let the silence stretch a moment longer. Then he continued, his voice returning to the flat, procedural tone of a man reading facts into a record. Given the dollar amount involved and the documented pattern of exploitation during hospice care, Ohio law classifies this as felony theft from a vulnerable adult. Ms. Ferris's compliance report has already been forwarded to the county prosecutor's financial crimes division. I want to be clear about something. This referral was made by the bank independently, under mandatory reporting law. It stands regardless of any decision the family makes today. So this is happening, Kurt said, finally lifting his head. Regardless. It's happening, Walter said quietly from where he sat near the back. The first time he'd spoken since the room filled. It was already happening the moment Marlene walked into my office in November. She asked me how much money it would take before a mistake became a crime. Brooke turned to me one last time. For a moment I saw, underneath the fear and the collapse, the sister I'd grown up with. The girl who used to let me borrow her books when nobody else was looking. The person our mother had loved every single day of her life, imperfectly, completely. Dana, she said, please, there has to be something. There's the $14,000, I said. That's left in the checking account you drained, minus the transfers you can prove went to medical costs. which Preston's already calculated at around 6,000. There's the house on Ridenour Street, which was never part of the estate. Mom left it to me before you ever knew there was anything left to fight over. There's the annuity Dad left in 1996 that Mom protected specifically so you couldn't touch it. And there's this. I am not going to ask the prosecutor to go easier on you. Mom already decided that wasn't my decision to make. She made the case. She left the decision about the reading to me. She left the decision about the law to the law. I heard my own voice as I said it, calmer than I felt. I understood, finally, standing in that room, why my mother had spent 31 years believing paperwork was a kind of love. It didn't shout. It didn't need to. It simply sat there, patient and exact, until the moment it was needed. Then it told the truth whether anyone in the room wanted to hear it or not. You said she wouldn't need it where she was going, I said. Quiet, almost gentle. I watched the words land on my sister exactly the way they'd landed on me. 3 weeks earlier, over a hospice blanket, over a stack of withdrawal slips. She didn't need it. But it turns out I did. And she made sure I'd have it, one way or another. Brooke didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. Ms. Ferris quietly closed her laptop bag. Preston began gathering the documents back into their careful, tabbed folder. Somewhere outside, on High Street, a garbage truck rattled past. Ordinary, indifferent to the fact that inside that narrow office above a shuttered shoe store, an entire family had just finished coming apart. Exactly the way one careful, dying woman had planned it. Down to the last document. Down to the last silent, steady breath. I want to go back for a moment to something small I skipped over earlier. I think it matters, and my mother would have wanted the record complete. 2 weeks after the reading at Preston's office, Kurt Tanner showed up alone at the Ridenour Street house. A Sunday evening. This was before the criminal charges, before the spa closed, before any of what I've already told you had settled into its final shape. No warning, no phone call first. Just his truck in the driveway when I pulled in from the grocery store. Kurt sitting on the porch steps in the cold, waiting. Brooke doesn't know I'm here, he said, before I'd even gotten out of my car. I stood by the driver's door for a moment, deciding whether to go inside without a word or hear him out. In the end, I think it was my mother's habit more than my own that decided it. Get the whole record. Don't assume you already know what's in the folder. You have 5 minutes, I said. He talked fast. The words tumbled out like he'd been rehearsing them the whole drive over. The loan had been his idea from the start, back when the spa was still profitable, before 2 competitors opened within a mile and business dropped by nearly 40% in 18 months. He'd panicked. He'd pushed Brooke to ask about the joint account. He'd been the one who wrote the email to the loan officer, not Brooke, though she'd known about it. He admitted that much, at least. I'm not asking you to go easier on her because of what I did, he said. I know that's not how it works. I just needed somebody in this family to know it wasn't only her. I pushed. She followed. That's the truth. Whatever it's worth now. I thought about that conversation for a long time afterward. I told Preston the next morning, and he made a note. He was careful to explain it likely wouldn't change the legal outcome much. Brooke had been the one with account access. She'd been the one physically present making the withdrawals. Intent could be shared. Culpability under Ohio law mostly couldn't. I didn't tell Rosalind about Kurt's visit. I didn't tell Carol Ann either, not for a long time. It felt like something that belonged only to me, and to whatever quiet reckoning Kurt was working through on his own. Alone, in a marriage already coming apart faster than either of them could see yet. He left after his 5 minutes were up, climbing back into his truck without asking for anything. without demanding forgiveness or leniency. I stood on that porch for a while after his taillights disappeared down Ridenour Street, thinking about how strange it was. The man who'd written the email that hung the whole case together. He might also, in some small and complicated way, have been the most honest person in that entire mess. I bring this up because I think it's easy, telling a story like this one, to make Brooke into something simple. A villain in a leather folder, smiling over withdrawal slips. She wasn't simple. None of us ever are. Not even the people who hurt us the most. She was scared, cornered, desperate in a way that made her willing to do something unforgivable to a woman who loved her completely. That's the truth of it. I think my mother, of all people, understood that better than anyone else in the family. She never once, in either letter, called Brooke evil. She called her someone I have to plan around instead of someone I could simply trust. There's a difference. It took me the better part of a year to understand why. Why that distinction mattered so much to a woman writing what she must have known were among her last words. The Marlene Boyd Fund has grown since I first told you about it. It started as $20,000 set aside for young mothers struggling with childcare. 3 years on, it's grown into something bigger than I ever expected. Mostly because Carol Ann, of all people, turned out to have a gift for fundraising I never knew she had. She organized a bake sale that first spring that raised another $6,000, then a silent auction the following year that brought in nearly 20 more. Donated items from half the businesses on Main Street. Everyone from the hardware store to the diner where Mom used to get her Sunday coffee. We've helped 31 families now. I chose that number on purpose. Once it happened. Once somebody pointed out the coincidence to me. 31 years my mother spent behind that filing desk. 31 families and counting, each one written carefully into my leather notebook, the way she taught me to keep a record of anything that mattered. Teresa Alvarez, the first family we helped, still sends a Christmas card every year. Her son started kindergarten last fall. She included a photo this year, the two of them standing in front of a small Christmas tree. On the back, in handwriting that reminded me instantly of my own mother's careful lettering, she'd written a single line. Some people build a legacy with money. Your mother built one with attention. Thank you for keeping it going. I keep that card in the same drawer as Mom's 2 letters now. The manila folder, the printed email, the deed to the house. It has become, without my really planning it, a kind of second filing cabinet. My own small archive of the things that mattered enough to write down and keep. I think my mother would have approved of the system, if not entirely of the circumstances that made it necessary. Rosalind told me once, months later, that Uncle Dale had asked her something. Why hadn't Mom simply confronted Brooke directly, back in June, the moment she found out about the loan? Rosalind said she didn't have a good answer for him at the time. I think I do now. A direct confrontation would have given Brooke the chance to deny it, to smooth it over with an apology and a promise, to make it disappear into the ordinary static of family arguments that everyone forgets by Thanksgiving. My mother didn't want it to disappear. She wanted it documented, undeniable, finished. That takes a colder kind of courage than shouting ever does. I don't think most people, faced with their own mortality, would have had the discipline to choose it. I still think, more often than I probably should, about that Sunday morning in the hospice room. My mother's hand thin in mine, her voice barely above a whisper. Let her take it, Dana. Let her. I understand now that those 4 words were not weakness. They were the single most disciplined thing I have ever watched another human being do. Holding steady while her own child took something precious from her. She had already calculated it, with the same cold precision she'd brought to 31 years of other people's paperwork. The only way to truly protect me was to let the wound happen first, in full view, where it could never later be argued away as a misunderstanding. There is a kind of love that looks, from the outside, exactly like surrender. I spent 3 weeks convinced that was what I was watching. I know now it was the opposite. It was the most patient, deliberate act of protection I will ever witness in my life. It came from a woman who had less than 6 weeks left to give it, spent entirely on making sure that when the truth finally arrived, it would arrive complete, undeniable, and entirely in my favor. The prosecutor's office moved on it faster than Preston expected. By February, Brooke had been formally charged with felony theft from a vulnerable adult, a Class 2 felony under Ohio law given the dollar amount, a second charge for financial exploitation of an elderly or disabled person layered on top of it. Kurt was named as a co-conspirator on the exploitation charge, based largely on the printed email. The prosecutor's investigator called it, in a phone call to Preston I only heard about secondhand, about as clean a piece of intent evidence as I've seen in 11 years. The spa closed in March, not dramatically, not with a public collapse, just a sign in the window one Tuesday morning, closed for renovations. 3 weeks later, a different sign. The building was under new ownership. The lender had called the loan the moment the balloon payment came due, and the promised inheritance funds never arrived. Brooke and Kurt lost the building, the equipment. According to Rosalind, who still heard things from Uncle Dale, they lost most of what they'd built together over 11 years of marriage. I want to tell you I felt triumphant watching it happen. I didn't. Not really. I felt something closer to what I imagine my mother felt filing those 31 years of other people's ruined finances at the county office. A kind of tired, clear-eyed sadness. This was simply what happened when greed met a debt it couldn't outrun. No amount of family loyalty could soften the arithmetic. Brooke pleaded guilty in May, on Preston's advice through her own attorney, to the theft charge. In exchange for the exploitation charge being reduced, she was sentenced to 18 months, most of it likely to be served on house arrest given her lack of prior record, along with a restitution order for the full $239,000. Her attorney estimated it would take at least a decade to pay back, if it was ever fully repaid at all. Kurt's marriage to Brooke did not survive the year. He moved out that winter and, according to Rosalind, took a job managing a boat dealership 2 counties over, starting again with almost nothing. The same as Brooke was about to do. I did not attend the sentencing. I sent Preston in my place. I sat that afternoon on the front porch of the Ridenour Street house instead. Cold May sun, a cup of coffee going lukewarm in my hands. I thought about my mother's letter. I hope you do not carry hatred for her longer than it serves you. I am not sure even now exactly how long hatred is supposed to serve a person. I know I stopped needing it sometime around the day I signed the paperwork to formally take ownership of the Ridenour Street house. Sitting at the same recorder's office on Sentinel Street where my mother had worked for 31 years. Filling out a form with a clerk who remembered her by name. She told me, unprompted, that Marlene Boyd had trained her personally back in 2003. Never once let a document leave that office with an error in it. She'd be glad it's you, the clerk told me, sliding the completed deed transfer across the counter. The way she used to talk about you. Quiet, she'd say, but sharp as anybody I ever trained. I used part of the annuity money to fix the furnace in that house finally. The same one Mom had refused to replace my entire childhood. The one that meant we wore coats indoors every winter I could remember. I hired a contractor named Everett Bishop out of Newark, an older man who'd known my father slightly, decades ago, before he died. He did the work carefully, thoroughly. the way I imagine my mother would have wanted anything done in that house. I also did something I hadn't planned to do, something that surprised even me. I set aside $20,000 from the annuity, a small fund at a credit union, for something Mom had mentioned once, years ago, in passing, about wanting to help young mothers in Daleford who worked full-time and still couldn't afford reliable childcare. She'd mentioned it the way she mentioned most of her real feelings, sideways, almost accidentally, over dishes at the sink. I'd forgotten about it until I found a folded newspaper clipping in her nightstand drawer while cleaning out the house, an article about a shuttered daycare center from years back. A single word written in the margin in her handwriting. Someday. I called it the Marlene Boyd Fund. I gave the first grant, $4,000, to a woman named Teresa Alvarez. She worked double shifts at the hospital in Daleford. She'd been driving 40 minutes each way to the nearest daycare that would take her son on short notice. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because I finally understood what my mother meant when she said paperwork was love that hadn't been read yet. I wanted, in my own small way, to keep writing that particular kind of letter. I saw Brooke exactly once that first year after the sentencing, at a gas station on Route 9, of all places. Both of us filling our tanks on opposite sides of the same pump island on a gray October afternoon, almost a year to the day after Mom's diagnosis. She looked thinner, older, the composure gone entirely, replaced by something tired and plain that I almost didn't recognize as my sister's face. "Dana," she said, and stopped, like she didn't know what came after my name. "Brooke." "I think about her every day," Brooke said finally. "I think about what I did. I know saying that doesn't fix anything." "No," I agreed. "It doesn't. I'm not asking you to forgive me," she said. "I don't think I've earned that. I just wanted you to know I understand now. What she was trying to protect. What I almost destroyed." I looked at my sister for a long moment, the gas pump clicking between us, the gray Ohio sky pressing low overhead, the way it always does in late October. I thought about Mom's letter, the line I'd read so many times by then I could recite it in my sleep. I hope, someday, she finds her way to being a different kind of person. "I don't hate you, Brooke," I said. I meant it, though it had taken me almost a year to be able to say it out loud. "I don't think I ever will completely trust you again, but I don't hate you." Something in her face loosened, just slightly. Not relief exactly, something quieter and sadder than relief. "That's more than I deserve." "Probably," I said. "Mom would have said something about that being between you and whoever keeps the real ledger. Not me." We didn't hug. We didn't make plans to see each other for coffee, the way people say, out of habit, without meaning it. We simply finished filling our tanks. We put our nozzles back. We drove off in opposite directions. I watched her SUV shrink in my rearview mirror. Whatever relationship we managed to rebuild, if any, would take longer than one conversation at a gas pump. It was no longer my job to force it faster than it wanted to go. People ask me sometimes, the few who know the whole story now, why my mother chose me to protect, and not both of us equally. It's a fair question. For a long time, I didn't have a good answer beyond the obvious one. I was there, and Brooke wasn't. Not in the way that counted. But I think the real answer is something Carol Ann said to me almost a year after the funeral, sitting on my porch with her thermos, same as always, like nothing about our mornings together needed to change just because the hospice room was gone. "Your mother didn't choose you because you were the good one and Brooke was the bad one," Carol Ann said. "She chose you because you were the one who could be trusted with the truth without needing to weaponize it first." That's rarer than people think, Dana. Most folks, you hand them a folder like that, They go looking for a fight before they've even finished reading it. You read the whole thing first. You let Preston do his job. You let the law do its job. You didn't turn it into a spectacle. I thought about that for a long time. I thought about the reading itself. How quiet the room had gone once the documents came out. How I hadn't raised my voice once, not even when Brooke's composure finally cracked and I could have said something cutting, something that would have felt good in the moment and cost me something later. I thought about my mother's calm mantra, the one she never said out loud, but that had shaped every year of my life without my noticing it. I don't get loud. I keep the page. There's a coda to this story I haven't told you yet, one that happened almost 2 years after Mom died. I think it closes the loop better than anything else could. Preston called me on a Tuesday afternoon in early spring, his voice careful in a way I'd learned to recognize as meaning something significant was coming. Brooke's restitution payments, court-ordered and modest, had been arriving on schedule for over a year by then. Small amounts, a few $100s a month, taken from whatever part-time work she'd managed to find after the spa's collapse and Kurt's quiet departure the previous winter. Preston told me the total had finally crossed a threshold worth mentioning: $11,000 repaid, a small fraction of the $239,000 she'd taken, but the first real evidence, on paper, that she meant to keep paying it back, not just wait out the sentence and disappear from the obligation. "There's something else," Preston said. She asked, through her attorney, whether you'd be willing to receive a letter from her, not asking for anything, not asking for forgiveness or a reduced restitution schedule, just a letter. I sat with that request for almost a week before I told Preston yes. The letter arrived on a Thursday, handwritten, 3 pages. None of the practiced warmth I remembered from the funeral podium, none of the composure from the coffee urn. It read like someone writing honestly for possibly the first time in years. She wrote about the fear that had driven her, the panic of watching a business she'd built with her own hands come apart, the specific ugly moment she'd decided our mother's death was just a number on a calendar, not a person she was about to lose. She wrote about missing our mother in a way I hadn't expected, grief that sounded raw instead of performed. Near the end, she wrote a single line that I read 4 or 5 times before I fully believed she'd written it. "Mom always said you were the one I should have watched more carefully, not because you were weak, but because you were the one actually paying attention. I understand that now. I wish I'd understood it while she was alive to see it land." I didn't write back right away. I'm not sure even now exactly what an appropriate response looks like to a letter like that. From a sister who took nearly $250,000 from your dying mother, who was only now, years later, starting to reckon honestly with what that meant. I eventually did write back. 3 sentences, nothing more. "I got your letter. I believe you mean it. Keep paying it forward, not just to me, but to whoever else needs it someday. I don't know if Brooke and I will ever be close again, not the way we might have been in some other version of our lives. One where money and jealousy hadn't carved such a wide channel between us, long before our mother ever got sick. I've made peace with that uncertainty. My mother taught me, without ever quite saying so directly, that some kinds of repair happen slowly, in small, verified increments. The same way a restitution payment arrives a few $100s at a time, until, eventually, enough of it has accumulated to mean something. I think about Mom's index card sometimes, the one waiting for me on the yellow Formica table. I filed 31 years of other people's messes. I was not going to leave you one of my own. She didn't leave me a mess. She left me a case, built with the same patience she'd given every stranger's deed and every stranger's will for 3 decades. Underneath the case, quieter than anything written on any of those pages, she left me proof, the clearest I will ever have, that she saw exactly who I was the whole time, even when I didn't fully see it myself. These days, Tyler Pruitt's little sister sometimes ends up in my third grade class. When she does, I think about the notebook habit without meaning to. I keep a small one for my own students now, too. Nothing dramatic, just names and small kindnesses worth remembering. My mother would have called that filing. I call it the same thing she did. Love that hasn't been read yet. I keep the furnace running warm now, every winter, all through the house on Ridenour Street. I don't wear a coat indoors anymore.